What happens when the one everyone laughs at becomes the only one who can save them all? When wisdom wears wrinkles, and the truth hides behind silence. In the proud village of Okoro, laughter was louder than listening. They mocked the old woman who talked to stones, ignored her warnings, and dismissed her as mad. But when the earth itself turned against them, when hunger replaced pride, and desperation silenced their drums, they discovered that the woman they despised was the only one who still knew how to speak to the ancestors. This isn't just a story about an old woman. It's a story about humility, sacrifice, and the unseen hands that hold the world together. Because sometimes, the people we mock are the ones holding the very seeds of our salvation. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Is it sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in London, or evening in Lagos? Drop your location in the comments below, hit like, and subscribe to Stories by the King, where every story carries a heartbeat, and every lesson leaves a mark. Now, lean in. Because this is the story of the old woman everyone mocked, and how she became the only one who could save the village. In the village of Okoro, where the red earth stretched endlessly beneath the African sun, there lived an old woman named Grace. She was bent like a question mark, her skin weathered like ancient bark, and her eyes clouded with age. Every morning, she shuffled to the village well with a clay pot balanced on her head, humming songs no one else remembered. The children laughed when she passed. The young men made jokes. Even the market women whispered and pointed, calling her the crazy one and the witch who talks to stones. Grace never responded. She simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile that held secrets deeper than the well itself. The village was proud and prosperous. Chief Samuel ruled with a firm hand, and the people boasted of their strong walls, their fertile farms, and their warriors who had never lost a battle. They believed they were untouchable, blessed by the ancestors, protected by their own strength. But Grace remembered different times. She remembered when humility lived in their hearts, when the elders taught that pride walks hand in hand with destruction. Now, those lessons were dismissed as old superstitions, relics of a fearful past. The village had grown too confident, too certain of its place in the world. And Grace, who had once been a respected healer and keeper of stories, had become invisible, a ghost among the living, ignored and mocked. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and blood, Grace stood at the edge of the village, staring toward the distant mountains. The wind carried whispers that made her skin prickle. She could feel it in her bones, the kind of knowing that comes not from seeing but from listening to what the earth itself was saying. Something was coming. Something dark and hungry and inevitable. She turned back toward the village, where laughter and music spilled from the square. They were celebrating another harvest, another year of abundance. But Grace saw the shadows gathering at the edges of their firelight, and her heart grew heavy with a sorrow she could not yet name. That night, Grace barely slept. She lay on her thin mat in her small hut at the village's edge, listening to the sounds of celebration fade into silence. In her dreams, she saw images that made her wake with tears on her cheeks, the well running dry, children crying from hunger, the proud walls of Okoro crumbling like sand. She saw faces twisted with desperation, hands reaching for help that would not come. And in the center of it all, she saw herself, standing alone with something precious in her hands, something the village would need but would never think to ask for. When dawn broke, Grace rose with purpose. She gathered her herbs, her sacred stones, and the small pouch of seeds she had kept hidden for years, seeds her grandmother had given her, seeds that could grow in any soil, even in the harshest drought. She did not know when the darkness would arrive, but she knew it would come. And when it did, the village that had mocked her would have nowhere else to turn. The morning market was already buzzing when Grace arrived. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, trying to reach the chief's compound. "Chief Samuel," she called out when she finally saw him, her voice thin but urgent. "I must speak with you. I have seen, but the chief waved her away without even looking at her. "Not now, old woman. I have important matters to attend to." The people around him laughed. A young warrior named Daniel sneered, "What could you possibly know that we don't? Go back to your hut and leave the thinking to those who still have their wits." The crowd erupted in laughter. Grace's eyes met the chief's for just a moment, and in that moment, she saw his pride, solid as stone, blind as midnight. She nodded slowly, turned, and walked away. Behind her, she heard them mocking her still, their voices carrying on the wind like the cries of birds who don't see the storm approaching. Grace returned to her hut and began to prepare. If they would not listen, she would be ready alone. Because she knew, she knew, that very soon, everything they trusted in would fail them. It started 3 days later, just as the sun reached its peak. The sky turned strange, not cloudy, but dim, as if a veil had been drawn across the heavens. Then came the insects. Millions of them, like a moving black curtain, descending upon Okoro's fields. They devoured everything, the yam plants, the cassava, the corn, even the leaves on the trees. Within hours, the village's pride and abundance were reduced to bare earth and broken stalks. The people ran through the fields, shouting, waving cloths, lighting fires, but nothing stopped the swarm. By evening, the insects had vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving behind the village in shock and a silence so complete it felt like death itself. Chief Samoa called an emergency gathering in the square. His face, usually so confident, was tight with worry. "This is a temporary setback," he announced, though his voice lacked conviction. "We have stored grain. We have trade connections with neighboring villages. We will survive this." But that night, the stored grain was discovered to be contaminated. Weevils and rot had somehow spread through every storage hut, as if the very earth had turned against them. Panic began to ripple through Okoro like a fever. The women wept. The men argued. And still, no one thought of Grace. She remained in her hut, tending to her small garden, the one place the insects had not touched, though no one had noticed. Her plants grew green and strong, defying the devastation that surrounded them. Days passed, and hunger began its cruel work. Children cried for food their mothers could not provide. The strong became weak. The proud became desperate. Chief Samoa sent messengers to the neighboring villages, offering gold, cloth, anything for food. But the messengers returned with empty hands and grave news: the devastation had spread. Every village for miles around had been struck by the same plague of insects, the same mysterious rot. There was no help coming. No rescue. No escape. Okoro, once so certain of its strength, stood alone and helpless. It was young Daniel, the warrior who had mocked Grace loudest, who first collapsed from hunger in the middle of the village square. His mother held him, sobbing, as others gathered around. And in that moment of utter desperation, someone whispered the unthinkable, "What about the old woman?" Grace. The suggestion was met with silence. Then, slowly, reluctantly, heads began to turn toward the edge of the village, toward the small hut they had all ignored for so long. Chief Samuel's pride warred with his desperation. How could he, the great chief, ask for help from the village fool? But as he looked at Daniel's pale face, at the haunted eyes of his people, he knew he had no choice. He rose, his legs unsteady from hunger, and began walking toward Grace's hut. The entire village followed, a slow procession of the humbled and the broken. When they arrived, they found Grace sitting outside, crushing herbs with a stone pestle, her movements calm and purposeful. She looked up as they approached, and her clouded eyes seemed to see through every one of them. "Grace," the chief said, and the word felt foreign on his tongue. It was the first time he had spoken her name in years. We need your help." The old woman was silent for a long moment, studying the faces before her. She saw the shame there, the regret, but also the genuine desperation. These were her people, despite everything. The children among them were innocent. And she had prepared for this moment, even knowing it would cost her everything she had saved. You mocked me, she said softly, not with anger but with simple truth. You called me crazy. You dismissed my warnings. And now you come. Chief Samoa bowed his head. We were fools. I was a fool. Please, we are starving. The children, Grace raised a hand, stopping him. She reached into her heart and pulled out the small pouch of seeds, holding it up to the fading light. These seeds were given to me by my grandmother, who received them from her grandmother. They are blessed by the ancestors, able to grow in 3 days, even in cursed soil. I have been saving them for a time like this. She paused, her grip tightening on the pouch. But there is only enough for one planting. After this, they are gone forever. Grace led the village to a small clearing near the river, a place the insects had left barren and lifeless. The people watched as she knelt, her old bones creaking with the effort, and began to dig small holes in the hard earth with her bare hands. One by one, she placed the precious seeds, whispering prayers over each one, words in a language so old that even she didn't fully understand them, only felt their power in her chest. The villagers stood in silence, some with tears streaming down their faces, others with hands clasped in hope. When the last seed was planted, Grace stood and turned to face them. Water them with respect, she said. Tend them with humility. The ancestors do not bless the proud, only the grateful. Then, exhausted from the effort and weakened by her own hunger, for she had been eating even less than the others, saving what little she had, Grace collapsed. Daniel, the young warrior who had mocked her most cruelly, caught her before she hit the ground. No, he whispered, cradling her frail body. Please, no. But Grace's eyes fluttered open, still holding that same sad, knowing smile. It's all right, child, she breathed. This is what the seeds needed. A sacrifice freely given. My life for yours. Around them, the villagers began to weep, not just from hunger, but from shame and sorrow. They had been so blind, so cruel. Chief Samoa knelt beside her, taking her weathered hand in his. Forgive us, he said, his voice breaking. Forgive me. Grace squeezed his hand with surprising strength. There is nothing to forgive. You learned. That is what matters. Teach your children, teach them to see the invisible ones, to hear the quiet voices. Strength is not found in wars and weapons, but in wisdom and humility. As she spoke, something miraculous began to happen. The earth where she had planted the seed started to tremble and crack. Green shoots burst forth, growing at an impossible rate, climbing toward the sky. Within hours, the clearing had transformed into a lush garden. Thick stalks heavy with grain, vines laden with vegetables, trees bending under the weight of fruit, all from Grace's sacred seeds. The people stared in wonder, then rushed forward, gathering the harvest with reverent hands. There was enough to feed the entire village for months, enough to share with the neighboring communities who had also suffered. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, the village gathered around Grace's hut. She had not died, as they had feared. Instead, she slept peacefully, her breathing steady and calm. The women took turns watching over her, bringing water and soft cloths. The children sat nearby, no longer laughing, but listening to the elders tell stories about Grace's life, stories of her kindness, her wisdom, and all the small miracles she had performed that they had been too proud to notice. When Grace finally woke 3 days later, she found her hut transformed. Fresh flowers surrounded her mat. Woven cloths covered the walls. And sitting beside her was Chief Samoa, his eyes red from sleepless nights. You saved us, he said simply. Grace shook her head slowly. No. The ancestors saved you. I was just their messenger. The question is, what will you do with this second chance? The chief bowed his head. We will build a new Okoro. One where every voice is heard, where the elderly are honored, where pride is replaced with gratitude. And we will tell this story to every generation, so they never forget the day the old woman everyone mocked became our salvation. Grace smiled then, a real smile that erased tears from her weathered face. Then my work is done, she whispered. Then it was all worth it. From that day forward, Okoro was changed. A seat of honor was built for Grace in the village square, and no important decision was made without first seeking her counsel. The children learned to greet every elder with respect, to listen to the quiet voices, to see the invisible ones. And on the anniversary of the plague, the village would gather at the clearing by the river, now called Grace's Garden, and tell the story of the old woman who held their salvation in a small pouch of seeds, waiting patiently for the day when the proud would finally learn to kneel. Grace lived many more years, surrounded by love and honor, her final days a stark contrast to the lonely years that had come before. And when she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep, the entire village mourned, not as they might mourn a stranger, but as they would mourn a mother, a teacher, a savior. They buried her in Grace's garden, beneath the trees that had sprung from her sacrifice, and they planted flowers that bloomed year-round, as if the earth itself was determined to keep her memory alive. Now, years later, travelers who pass through Okoro speak of a village unlike any other, where the old are treasured, where humility is taught before strength, and where a beautiful garden grows at the river's edge, tended by children who never knew the woman it was named for but who tell her story with pride. They say that sometimes, when the wind blows just right, you can hear an old woman humming, a sound like memory itself, like love that refuses to be forgotten. And the people of Okoro smile when they hear it, because they know that Grace is still there, still watching, still reminding them of the lesson that saved them all, that true strength is not in what you have, but in what you're willing to give. That wisdom often wears the face of the forgotten. And that sometimes, the person you mock today is the very one who will save you tomorrow. Tell me, what lesson you're taking away from Grace's story? And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that wisdom often wears the face of the forgotten. This is Stories by the King, where every tale carries truth. And every truth reminds us to never mock the ones who still listen to the earth.